Hey, welcome. So, quiet quitting, you've heard the term everywhere, right? But what if it's not just another buzzword for being burned out? What if it's actually a direct response to a huge economic problem that's been brewing for like 50 years? Well, today, we're going to unpack that whole story, looking at everything from economic theory to ancient wisdom to figure out what's really going on.
It really all comes down to this one simple, pretty personal question. Are you paid what you're worth? How you answer that, and maybe more importantly, how you even calculate your worth, well, that's at the very heart of this entire conversation.
So, let's dive right into the economics of it. To really get a handle on quiet quitting, we first got to look at the basic deal, the fundamental agreement between an employee and an employer.
It all starts with this classic principle called the Marginal Productivity Theory. I know, it sounds super complicated, but don't worry. As economist Salvatore describes it, the idea is pretty simple. Your wages should match the extra value, the extra cash that you bring into your company.
Yeah, to put it even more simply, if you get more productive and create more value, your pay should go up to match it. It's a simple, logical relationship. At least, that's the theory.
But this is where theory and reality just completely split apart. Since the 1970s, data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that while our productivity has absolutely skyrocketed, real wages have basically flatlined. And that massive, ever-widening gap between the two, well, that's what's being called the Great Disconnect.
And here's the really weird part. What makes this gap so strange is that, in the past, the market would usually fix itself in a year or two. But for decades now, it just hasn't. This disconnect has become a permanent feature of our economy, and it's leading directly to how workers are responding today.
So, how does this broken promise actually play out in the real world? Well, if that whole work harder, earn more deal is off the table, people react. They start to just, work their wage.
And that brings us right to it. Quiet quitting isn't about dramatically storming out of the office. No, it's about making a conscious choice to do exactly what's in your job description and nothing more. No more going the extra mile for a company that isn't going the extra mile for you.
And get this is not a niche trend. According to Gallup's research, a staggering 50%, at least half of the entire U.S. workforce is in this quiet quitter category right now. Just think about that. Half of the people you work with might be doing just enough to not get fired.
Now, you've probably heard that quiet quitting is all about bad managers or a toxic culture. And look, those are definitely real factors. But the economic argument here is way more fundamental. It suggests that workers are literally dialing back their effort to match what they're being paid. In a way, they're trying to close that productivity pay gap all by themselves.
This feeling of getting a raw deal, it's nothing new. This whole debate over what a worker is truly owed is absolutely timeless. In fact, the core principle goes back thousands of years.
Just take a look at this line from the book of Deuteronomy. The idea is so simple and powerful. The animal doing the work, the ox making the grain, should be allowed to eat some of that very grain. It means the worker deserves to share in the results of their own labor.
And you see the same idea echoed centuries later in the New Testament. Here, Jesus is quoted saying directly that the worker deserves his wages. It's just presented as a basic fact of life, a self-evident truth. Fair pay for fair work is a fundamental principle of justice.
Okay, so up to this point, we've basically defined worth economically, as the money you generate. But what if that's the wrong way to measure it entirely? The sources we're looking at here suggest a radically different way of thinking about our value.
And that brings us to a really challenging question. What if your real, intrinsic value as a person has absolutely nothing to do with your productivity, or your job title, or the number on your paycheck?
So you really have two competing ideas of worth here. On the one hand, you've got your economic worth. It's a number, it goes up and down, and it's based entirely on what you produce. But on the other hand, there's a theological worth, based on the idea that you were created in God's image. And in this view, your value is infinite, and it never, ever changes.
So if you go with that second view, that your worth is already secure, already infinite, how does that change how you approach your job? How does it affect your motivation when your paycheck is no longer the thing that measures your value as a person?
Passages like this one from the Gospel of Matthew suggest a pretty big shift in focus, away from temporary, earthly pay and toward a higher, more permanent kind of purpose. The basic idea is that whatever you truly treasure is what's ultimately going to drive you.
And this creates a really powerful chain of logic. You can see how this creates a kind of domino effect, right? It starts with a secure sense of your own value. That frees you from needing your job to tell you that you're worthy. Then you're able to work for a purpose that's way bigger than just money. And the surprising result of this mindset? Well, according to the source, this is what actually unlocks real excellence and innovation.
So what does this actually look like in the modern workplace? Well, if your self-worth isn't on the line with every single project, you're free to take smart risks, to innovate, to strive for excellence. Not because you're chasing a bonus, but because you're driven by a much deeper sense of purpose. You're no longer just working your wage, you're working your mission.
And so we kind of end up back where we started, but with a new twist. We started by asking, are you paid what you're worth? But maybe the better question to ask is this. If your identity and your value are completely secure, totally independent of your job title or your salary, how would that change the way you show up to work tomorrow? It's a fascinating thought to sit with. Thanks for watching.